5 minutes the next time after the question period in order to continue on the questions and comments. Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
We all know we're in a fight to save our healthcare system. Public health care, single-payer, universal health care is at risk, and I think it's important we revisit our history. I know this history firsthand, not from books, but because a dear friend of mine, the late Jim McNeil, was part of the Saskatchewan CCF government that brought in that health care. We forget that the profiteering doctors of Saskatchewan went out on strike to block health care. We forget that foreign doctors came in so the people of Saskatchewan would have medical care, mostly doctors from the UK. And when they got to Saskatchewan, I don't know how many Canadians know this, Jim told me, the Saskatchewan doctors blocked access to hospitals for all the foreign doctors. UK doctors were operating on kitchen tables. Members of the Saskatchewan cabinet had family members who needed medical care. They were up against it, and they were brave. They held the line. We owe it to them to do the same and protect our public health care system from profiteering privatization.
Just want to remind members that the hum of side discussions is quite high, so I just want to remind members that we are in session here. The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Madame la Présidente. This Christmas season, when families were preparing to gather and celebrate, catch up with loved ones, our community was shaken to its core upon learning of a devastating mass shooting. One gun led to the loss of 6 lives and carved an unforgettable scar in the city of Vaughan. Our community, known for its generosity and can-do spirit, was shaken by this horrific act of violence. Madame la Présidente, like all Vaughan residents, I've kept the victims, Rita Camilleri, Victoria Panza, Russell Manick, Lorraine Manick, Navid Dada, and survivor Doreen Danino and their families in my thoughts since this dark December 18th. We know there's no place for gun violence in Canada, not in Saskatchewan, not in Nova Scotia, Toronto, Quebec City, or the city of Vaughan. Nowhere. Our country will never forget the innocent lives lost and bright futures that have been taken way too soon. To our first responders, thank you for your swift response, your professionalism, and your commitment to keeping our communities safe and secure. Thank you.
The honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Madam Speaker, one of my favourite local events was back this year for the first time since the pandemic. Joe Loweth and Sons Dairy Farm in Copetown held their annual open house on December 27th, so that people from the city could learn more about where their food comes from. Other Hamilton area dairy producers pitched in to help with a crowd of nearly 1,000. Robotic milking, feeding, calving were all on full display. But what's more exciting is they were already showcasing a bright new building just steps from the dairy barns. This summer, it will open as a thriving new farm-to-table business and the latest agritourism attraction. Not only will Summit Station Dairy and Creamery be a landmark that celebrates local heritage, it's also entrepreneurialism at its best. Congratulations to Ben, Jen, Carl, David, and the entire Loweth family for their contribution to the local economy and generations of innovation in the dairy industry.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Madame la Présidente, 2 weeks ago, Gerard and Jenny Barron, neighbours and Halifax West residents, were the proudest parents in Montreal's Bell Centre. Why, you ask? Because for the first time ever, they got to watch their boys go head-to-head as the only siblings from Nova Scotia to ever play in the NHL. Morgan plays for the Winnipeg Jets, while Justin plays for the Montreal Canadiens. The story of their success is incredible. At 16, Morgan left home to play 2 seasons at St. Andrews College, earning himself a scholarship to Cornell. He was later drafted by the New York Rangers and was traded to Winnipeg. Justin spent his entire junior career with the Halifax Mooseheads. He was selected by the Colorado Avalanche in the first round of the 2020 NHL draft and was traded to the Habs. Please join me in congratulating both Barons on their tremendous success on the ice. Woo-hoo!
The honourable member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, very few people have been able to represent the soul of a people like Madame Viola Léger with her character La Sagouine. Viola Léger was La Sagouine, and for many of us, La Sagouine was Acadia. For over 50 years, thousands of time, Madame Léger represented this wise person who had been affected by life and injustice and the suffering that has been suffered by the Acadian people. If La Sagouine was created by her friend Antonine Maillet, it was Viola Léger who gave her life. Viola Léger was a proud Acadian, and more than that, she contributed to the cultural development of Acadia throughout her life, particularly through her foundation to promote Acadian theatre. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, and on behalf of all Quebecers, I wish to offer to her family, to all those who loved her, and to all Acadians, our most sincere condolences. Thank you, Madame Léger, for have been, for such a long time, the face, the voice, and the soul of the Acadian nation. The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Mr. Speaker, at the recent Hockey World Juniors, 5 members of the Sherbrooke Phoenix QMJHL team stood out. Team Canada's Joshua Roy and Tyson Hines, as well as coach Stéphane Julien, represented Sherbrooke by winning the gold medal with Team Canada. And 2 other Phoenix players, David Spacek and Jacob Brabenich, deservedly brought home silver medals with the Czech team. Congratulations to all the medal winners and participants in the tournament. With the Phoenix, hockey fans in Sherbrooke are lucky to be able to gather every week and see some of the best players in the world at home in Sherbrooke in the electrifying atmosphere of the Palais des Sports. Together, let's continue to support and improve our national support.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The motto of the Order of Canada is "They desire a better country." I can think of few people who more truly embody that motto than newly appointed member of the Order of Canada, Jean Aitchison of Stratford. A nurse by career, Jean has dedicated her time and energy to the service of others. On countless medical mission trips, Jean has provided care to so many in need around the globe. She also founded the Stratford Mission Depot to help coordinate the donation and delivery of medical supplies and equipment. Just this past year, Jean and her team of volunteers saw the need for medical supplies for Ukrainian refugees and sprang into action, quickly amassing 14 cubic meters of medical supplies. Jean is quick to deflect praise away from herself and towards her team of volunteers. And it is that modesty that underscores why she is so deserving of this special recognition. Congratulations, Jean Aitchison.
The Honourable Member for York Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we start the winter session of Parliament, I want to recognize an amazing achievement from students in York Centre over the holidays. Our community rests on the values of kindness and compassion, giving back and showing up for one another. I'm overwhelmed by the generosity that students, families, and staff from Stylecroft Public School showed in December, collecting 200 pounds of food for the North York Harvest Food Bank. This amazing act of kindness allowed North York Harvest to provide hundreds of meals to the most vulnerable members of our community. A special thank you to Principal Karen Barnes and the wonderful staff at Stylecroft PS who organized the campaign and who did not hesitate for one moment when asked and jumped at the opportunity to help. I want to especially thank the generous students and families at Stylecroft. I also want to thank the staff at North York Harvest Food Bank, who provide such an important service every day to those who are facing food insecurity in our communities with integrity and compassion. When we give it home, we grow a community that is strong and supportive.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to the life of Mr. Dwight Petton, who passed away earlier this month after a short but valiant battle with cancer at the young age of 56. Dwight was a very successful and respected fisherman from our riding who had an enthusiasm for the industry that was surpassed only by the love for his family and passion to his faith. Far away from his home and family in Portagrave, he joined several missionaries throughout his lifetime around the world, including one in Africa and Thailand. Dwight was a successful fisherman and a proud owner of his family business, DMC Enterprise, which he operated side by side with his son Matthew. He took great pride in his fishing vessels and respected as a leader in the industry. For 25 years, he served in the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary. Dwight will be remembered as a loving husband to his wife Cynthia, a wonderful father to his children Melanie, Matthew and Melissa, and his grandchildren who were his pride and joy and who knew him simply as Pop. Dwight, you were taken from us way too soon. Your legacy will live on. Rest easy, my friend.
The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 years since this Prime Minister took office, and his soft-on-crime policies have unleashed a crime wave in Canada. This government has made life easier for violent criminals by providing easy access to bail and repealing mandatory minimum sentences for serious crimes. As a result, violent crime has gone up 32% in the past year, and gang-related killings have gone up by 92% since 2015. Furthermore, they have failed to stop the flow of illegal firearms across the border. As a consequence, 5 police officers have tragically lost their lives this past fall in the line of duty. Our communities feel less safe, and this government is making it worse. Despite their dismal record, Liberals recently initiated a ban on hunting rifles and shotguns, making thousands of these firearms illegal. Hunters, farmers, and target shooters are not the problem. Liberals are the problem. This Liberal, made-in-Canada crime wave must stop. Only a Conservative government will do what is necessary to keep violent criminals off our streets.
The honourable member for Richmond Hill.
Anger, pain, misery, and violence. Mr. Speaker, these are the words that have shaped the experience of Iranians, especially brave women of Iran, as they are fueled by their hope and courage in the face of the regime, tyranny, and oppression for the past 4 decades. When no words are powerful enough to describe the atrocities, we can respond with powerful actions. I, alongside my colleagues in York Region Liberal Caucus, have sponsored 7 environmental activists. Going beyond our borders, I have joined members of the Italian and German Parliament, Laura Bolderini and Carmen Veggi, to sponsor Armita Abbasi. Nilufar Bayani is a courageous environmentalist who has been imprisoned for caring for her motherland, its wildlife, and the environment. Armita Abbasi has been calling for equality for women. Instead of applauding these women, the Iranian regime responded with unlawful imprisonment, abduction, severe torture, and brutal sexual assault. Mr. Speaker, the women of Iran are embodiment of bravery. قلب من همواره برای خاک سرزادگاه هم ایران و فرزندان دلیرش میتپد. به امید ایرانی همیشه آزاد و آباد.
The honourable member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 8 years under this Prime Minister, Canadians are struggling. They're struggling under his wasteful inflationary spending. Mortgage payments are taking a bigger bite out of their paychecks, and food banks have seen a massive increase in families needing their services. Meanwhile, over the last 8 years, Liberals and their well-connected friends have never had it so good. McKinsey & Company, a consulting firm surrounded by controversy and formerly run by the Prime Minister's friend Dominic Barton, has received over $100 million in government contracts since 2015. Canadians deserve to know why the Liberals gave this consulting firm millions of dollars and what kind of influence McKinsey has over this government. They've created an unaccountable shadow government with their consultant friends, and Canadians are paying the price. The Prime Minister needs to come clean with Canadians, end his binge spending.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, it was 6 years ago. 100 Canadians gathered at the Grand Mosque of Quebec City, and suddenly tragedy struck. 6 men died, 20 others were seriously injured. They died for one reason and one reason only, because they were Muslim, because they were united by faith. This horrible attack showed the ugliest side of humanity. This is born of racism, and this is why we must support dialogue with all. We must unite and not divide. Unite through words, through action, and through humanity.
Speaker, 6 years ago at the Quebec Mosque, 6 men, 6 Canadians died because of their faith. This tragedy reminds us that we always have to be cautious, and we shall condemn any violence based on faith and ethnicity. It's our duty to be careful of any sign of racism, because there is no small racism. We shall unite, not divide. Unite by words, by action, by humanity. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member. The honourable member for Acadie Bathurst. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On January 28, 2023, at the age of 92, the great actress Viola Léger passed away. Initially a nun and a teacher, she will be remembered by Acadians in the whole world as an actress, and specifically for playing the role of La Sagouine from the work of Antonin Maillet. Madame Léger played this legendary character over 3,000 times on stage, in addition to numerous other roles in theatre, film, and television. Madame Léger then sat in the Senate of Canada, where she supported causes such as the fate of minorities, the survival of the French language, and the importance of arts and culture. During her long career, Madame Léger showed her incredible ability to promote Acadia. She was a formidable ambassador for our culture and language, and today all Acadians mourn the death of this great woman. Thank you, Madame Léger, for your invaluable contribution to Acadian culture and for the monumental legacy that you leave behind. Our sincere condolences to her family and friends. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, 6 years ago, a young radicalized man committed a heinous act of violence such as we have rarely seen before. He entered the Quebec City Mosque and opened fire on those present, first with a semi-automatic weapon and then with a handgun. 6 men lost their lives and 19 others were injured. Families were shattered, leaving loved ones grieving. We said never again. 6 years later, are we much further ahead? Extremely dangerous weapons used only by people to kill people are still in circulation, and online hate, racism, and Islamophobia are still being expressed. Right-wing extremist rhetoric normalizes and feeds this radicalization and hatred that targets minorities. The killer was radicalized by words that pushed him to attack and kill Muslims. We still have a lot of work to do through dialogue and better understanding between cultures, but also by taking an uncompromising stance against racism, discrimination, and supremacism. It's an imposing but necessary task, and it's the responsibility of each and every one of us. I would like to remind the honourable members that we need to be quiet so that we can hear the words of our colleagues as they give their SO31s. The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, there are moments that mark the history of a society, of a community, and a family. Tragically, January 29th, 2017 is one of those moments. Families and friends lost loved ones who were cut down by gunfire in the attack on the Grand Mosque of Quebec City, cut down because they were Muslim. Yesterday was the 6th time that we've gathered to commemorate these men whose lives were cut short by hate, a moment to reflect together, but also a moment of hope. Hope that we can live and grow together on the path of understanding and mutual respect.
Ibrahima Bari, Mamadou Tanou Bari, Khaled Belkacemi, Abdelkrim Hassan, Azedine Soufiane, et Aboubakar Tabti.
They wanted to live in peace, happily, without a care for tomorrow. We must ensure that all can live in a way that was stolen from these men. We must insist on the right of every Quebecer to practice the religion of their choice in safety, dignity, and freedom. And every day, we must fight hate in all its forms. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Barrie-Innisfil.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister's high taxes and inflationary deficits, 22% of Canadians, 28% of them women, say they're completely broke. After 8 years, 32% say they'll be in the same boat if prices continue rising. After 8 years, 52% are concerned they don't have enough money to feed their families. After 8 years, 1.5 million Canadians are using food banks every month. After 8 years, young people feel lied to and let down by this Prime Minister. After 8 years, seniors can barely afford groceries, and many are living in the cold, unable to heat their homes. After 8 years, Canadians are anxious, angry, and worried about their future. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is completely out of touch and has no solutions to the problem that he's created. After 8 years of dividing Canadians, this is a Prime Minister who cannot be redeemed. He can only be replaced. After 8 years, Canada's Conservatives, led by the member from Carleton, are focused and ready to lead. And as Parliament returns, we will show Canadians why.
The honourable member for Mississauga East Cooksville.
Speaker, I sat with a force of nature 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Hazel McCallion, a dear friend, a mentor, a leader, someone that devoted her life to serving the people of Mississauga, Ontario, and Canada. We're all overcome with sadness by her passing, and our hearts go out to her family. She was always there to lead and to help, helping with the biggest mass evacuation in Canadian history, helping people through the pandemic at 101 years of age young, helping build Mississauga to the successful city it is today. Hazel had great insight and vision, but her greatest strength was her connection with people. Loved by all that met her, with a big heart and a deep caring for community, she will always be remembered as the people's mayor. She was so proud of our country. Last thing she said to me is, "Peter, we live in the best place in the world, Canada." Hazel, on behalf of the Parliament of Canada, we thank you. May you rest in peace.
I have the honour to inform the House that the Clerk of the House has received from the Chief Electoral Officer a certificate of the election and return of Mr. Souza, member for the Electoral District of Mississauga Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present to you Mr. Charles Souza, member for the Electoral District of Etobicoke, Mississauga Lakeshore, who has taken the oath, signed the roll, and now claims the right to take his seat.
Let the member take his seat. Congratulations. Very good. questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 8 years, this Prime Minister has doubled our national debt and created inflationary deficits. And what did we get for that money? There's more inflation, there's more poverty, and more people resorting to food banks. So where'd the money go? They went to contracts for the Prime Minister's cronies. There's been $15 billion more spent on those contracts. How many of those contracts went to McKinsey? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, 7 years ago we were elected as a government and we promised to invest in the middle class and all those working hard to join it. And that's precisely what we did with the Canada Child Benefit, with supports for seniors and students. We managed to create millions of jobs and get people out of poverty. Unfortunately, at every step of the way, the Conservatives opposed us. They voted against our investments in dental care, in rental supports, and in childcare. We are going to continue investing. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I asked the Prime Minister how much McKinsey got. He said, well, it was all for the middle class. He's always had difficulty defining what the middle class is. Now we know his definition. It's his friends who make $1,500 an hour as high-priced consultants for his government over at McKinsey, where his personal friend Dominic Barton was the boss. We now know that he spent $15 billion plus per year on high-priced consultants, while Canadians are eating at food banks, living in homeless shelters, and house prices have more than doubled. Again, how much did his government give McKinsey? How much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the Leader of the Opposition snickers at the middle class, we will stay focused on supporting them. That's exactly what we did by bringing forward supports for low-income renters, supports for families to send their kids to the dentist. These are things that the Conservative Party voted against, just as they stood against the Canada Child Benefit, just as they stood against help for seniors, just as they've continued to stand against investments that have Canadians' backs before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and since the pandemic. We will continue to be there for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, mortgage payments have doubled, up to $7,000 per month for an average house in Toronto. Rent prices have doubled, up to $2,500 a month for an average place in Toronto. The number of people eating at food banks has gone up to 1.5 million, and crime is up 32%. So we wonder where all this $500 billion of inflationary debt actually went. Now we know. Liberal friends got the money. So I'm going to ask a third time. The well-connected insiders at McKinsey, how much did the Prime Minister give them? How much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past number of years, we've invested in supporting Canadians from coast to coast to coast, to lift families out of poverty, to help seniors make ends meet, to invest in low-income renters, to help people access dental care for their kids, to deliver the kinds of things that have made not just Canadians better off, but our whole economy work better. We're going to continue to step up in investing in Canadians while Conservatives continue to push cuts and austerity and not being there for Canadians. We know that investing in Canadians is the best way to build a better future.
Right. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Prime Minister says that Canadians have never had it so good as they face 40-year highs in inflation, as food prices are up 12% year over year after he brought in a carbon tax on our farmers, as the cost of housing has more than doubled, as students are actually living in homeless shelter. We know why, though, he's so out of touch with these people after 8 years, because the people he surrounds himself with, like the high-priced consultants at McKinsey, are doing better than ever. So I'd like to ask him again. This company did work of little or no value according to his own public servants. How much did Canadians have to pay for that?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on the
contrary, Canadians are struggling right now with high inflation caused by global crises, with interest rates, with disruptions in the global supply chains, and that's why we've stepped up to support Canadians. Despite Conservative politicians voting against it, we've been able to keep investing in Canadians while maintaining the best balance sheet in the G7. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio, the lowest deficit of all our G7 partners, and we've put that to work to support the Canadians who need it most. We will continue to be there for the middle class and people working hard to join it.
Very good.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, he finally got him to admit that Canadians are suffering, and it's after 8 years of this Prime Minister. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, we have 40-year highs in inflation. We have 32% increase in crime. We have the TTC transit system in downtown Toronto overtaken by crime. We have more people eating at food banks and living at homeless shelters after 8 years of this Prime Minister. But not everybody's doing badly. His friends at McKinsey are rolling in cash. First, they said it was $50 million. Now the government says it's over $100 million. We want to know the real number. Will the Prime Minister finally answer the question? How much did he give McKinsey?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, everyone in this House, from conversations with constituents, with conversations with people right across the country, know well that Canadians are facing tough times. What the difference is between the Conservative leader and myself is, instead of proposing real solutions, instead of telling Canadians how they're going to help them and invest them, the Conservative leader stands up, crosses his arms, throws up his hands and says, everything is broken. Well, that's not what Canadians are living through, Mr. Speaker. Canadians stick up for each other. We're there for each other. We support each other through the tough times. That's exactly what we've been doing through this pandemic, through these past years. That's what we will continue to do, no matter how much.
L'honorable député de Belleuil. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to see you again and all my colleagues. As you know, the Prime Minister has appointed Amira El-Gawabi, and obviously he looked into everything she'd said in the past, and some people find that very insulting towards Quebec. But he went ahead and appointed her. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, does he actually think that that appointment is going to be inclusive and bridge building rather than divisive? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, last night, I had the honor to be in the Grand Mosque in Quebec City with a community that 6 years ago was the victim of a terrible terrorist attack by someone motivated by hatred, by intolerance, and by ignorance of the Muslim community in Quebec City and all across the country. We all have a duty to stand up every day to recognize and fight against Islamophobia, to recognize that we all have some work to do. We have to be there for our Muslim fellow citizens, and we always will be. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, Ms. El-Gawabi says that Bill 21 is Islamophobic, and rather than condemning her, I demanded a meeting with her. I asked for a meeting as elected officials, as members of Parliament who will be voting on the budget. Can the Prime Minister tell us whether he hopes that that meeting will take place? Will he facilitate that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, with all my heart, that meeting will take place. I think it'll be a great conversation. She'll be able to explain the extent to which Islamophobia and systemic racism are a reality for people all across this country, and the fact that we all have a duty to listen to one another, to understand how legislation may be, and words may be, injurious, hurtful, even if that wasn't the intention. We have a duty to take care of vulnerable communities in our country. And yes, I will indeed facilitate that meeting, which I'm sure she will be delighted to have with the leader of the Bloc Québécois.
Burnaby South.
In the last election, the Prime Minister criticized the Conservatives for proposing to add more for-profit privatization in our healthcare system. But now, Doug Ford is doing precisely the same thing, and the Prime Minister calls it innovative. Why this major flip-flop? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have always been crystal clear in the Liberal Party. We defend our healthcare system. We will always defend the principles of the Canada Health Act. It's not negotiable. And we have already said that many times over the past years. We've actually withdrawn funding to provinces that were not complying with the Canada Health Act. We will always defend our public system. And even in our negotiations now to improve health care for Canadians all across the country, we will always be there to defend the public system. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Says one thing and does another. In the last election, the Prime Minister made a really big deal of calling out the Conservatives for proposing the idea of bringing in more for-profit, private health care. But now when Doug Ford is doing exactly that, he's calling it innovation. I'm not surprised the Conservatives support this approach. They believe in for-profit, private health care. But I am surprised with the Prime Minister. Why the flip-flop?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I and the Liberal government have always been very, very clear. We stand for a public health system that fully abides by the Canada Health Act. This is something that matters to most Canadians, certainly matters to us, and we will continue to defend. We know that even as we negotiate with the provinces to ensure that we're delivering more family doctors, better mental health supports, moving forward on backlogs, supporting Canadians who need emergency care, we will ensure that the Canada Health Act is fully respected. In the past, this government has pulled back money from provinces that haven't respected it. We will continue to do that.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 years of Liberal mismanagement, 1 in 5 Canadians are saying they're completely out of money, skipping meals, and accessing charity services just to meet their basic needs. The Governor of the Bank of Canada said that the interest rate hikes were because of out-of-control, wasteful Liberal spending. Even former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau had it right when he admitted that the Liberals overspent in the last 8 years. When will this Prime Minister and Canada's worst money manager in Canadian history stop breaking Canada, rein in his spending, and making the price of everything go up?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that many Canadians are facing real challenges. And that's why our government is there to help with a plan which is compassionate and fiscally responsible. Here's what we're doing. Doubling the GST, providing $500 to people who are facing challenges paying their rent, providing dental care to Canadian kids, eliminating the interest on Canada's student loans, and improving the Canada Workers' Benefit. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? The Conservatives voted against all of those essential measures. Here.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Speaker, after 8 years of Liberal mismanagement, the only people getting help and ahead are the Prime Minister, who gets to lavish in $6,000 a night hotel rooms, his buddies over at Mackenzie, and the We Charity, who gets hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contracts, racists like Laith Maruth, who gets hundreds of $1,000s worth of contracts, prisoners and dead people who get free CERB checks. It's never been so good for those people, but Canadians have never had it so bad. And recently, Canadians were just uppercut with another interest rate hike because of out-of-control Liberal spending. When will the Prime Minister stop rewarding his Liberal cronies and actually start helping struggling Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk for a minute about what the Conservatives would do to Canadians and the Canadian economy. The Conservatives are proposing to eviscerate our essential EI system. The Conservatives would endanger seniors' pension and the CPP. The Conservatives would make pollution free again. The Conservatives would deny Canadian families climate incentive checks. Mr. Speaker, those are all Conservative policies, and they would all hurt Canadians in their pocketbook.
That's right.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians have never found it so hard just to keep a roof over their heads. Rent increases have gone up at a record pace, and the national average is now over $2,000 a month. Young adults are finding it virtually impossible to pay these rents, and families are being squeezed. When will the Liberals reverse their inflationary policies that are driving up inflation and making it harder for everyday people to even just stay in their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives really believed in supporting those Canadians who are having the hardest time paying their rent, they should have supported our plan to give those people $500 to help. But you know what else, Mr. Speaker? The best way to pay your rent and to pay your mortgage is to have a job. And that is why our government has been relentlessly focused on job creation. 100,000 jobs created in December alone. Today, we have recovered 121% of the jobs lost to COVID, compared to just 106% in the United States.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, rental inflation is up 12%. Food inflation is up more than 11%. Any of these government's programs will just get evaporated. We know that the former governor of the Bank of Canada said that Canada's inflation was homegrown, and the current governor said that inflation is as high as it is because of all of this spending that these Liberals have done, all of the extra spending. So after 8 years, when will the Liberals finally get their inflationary spending under control?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to talk down the Canadian economy. That is reckless and that is irresponsible. We know Canadians need support, and that is why we have a plan which is compassionate, but it is also fiscally responsible, Mr. Speaker. That is why just hours after we tabled the fall economic statement, Moody's reaffirmed our AAA credit rating. Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7, the lowest debt to GDP ratio, and in 2022, Canada had the strongest economic growth.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, despite the fine words and promises to the middle class, the fact is Canadians are suffering more and more. I visited food banks in Lac Mégantic, Thetford Mines, Disraeli, Plessisville, and Princeville, and what I saw broke my heart. Seniors and families can no longer make ends meet. There's been an almost 30% increase in people who can't afford to pay for food anymore. That's the record of this government, this Liberal government, after 8 years. Does the Prime Minister not realize that what he's done has pushed more and more people to the food banks, and what's he going to do about it? The Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we're going to talk about poverty in this country, this government has an impressive record. Over 1 million Canadians have been raised out of poverty by the steps we've taken, be it the Canada Child Benefit, the increase in the seniors' benefits. Those are things the Conservatives voted against. In fact, they wanted to raise the retirement age for seniors, but we didn't let that happen. And we have supports for Canadians at every stage of their lives, and we hope the Conservatives will get on board. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the cost of food has gone up by 12%, and I'm very concerned that this Prime Minister, after 8 years of promising sunny days, has lost touch with reality. Child care centres are no longer putting meat on the menu because it's too expensive. Food banks are running out of produce because grocery stores don't have any to donate because the middle class can't afford it. How has this Prime Minister let it come to this? The Honourable Minister of Families. Mr. Speaker, once we took office, since then there have been 400,000 or 500,000 fewer children in poverty compared to when the Conservatives were in office. And that's thanks to our program, the Canada Child Benefit, or the Child Care Program, which is bringing costs down by 50% all across the country. Mr. Speaker, I get stories from families all across the country explaining to me how helpful this has been with them, affording the cost of living and so on. It's unfortunate that the Conservatives have not supported the steps we've taken. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, Quebec has every right to democratically make its own choices for society. That's why it's unacceptable for the federal government to threaten to attack the Notwithstanding Clause. The Notwithstanding Clause is the only guarantee Quebec and the provinces have that the federal government and federally appointed judges won't be the only ones to decide what we're allowed to do. The Premier of Quebec was right to call this a direct attack on our nation's ability to protect our collective rights. Will Ottawa back off? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, our government has always been very clear when it comes to concerns about the use of the notwithstanding clause by the provinces. We are considering all our options. We are determined to protect rights and freedoms under the Charter. The Charter was designed to protect minorities all across Canada. We have been clear, and we will remain clear in the future. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, I'll read a passage about the notwithstanding clause. It is a way for federal and provincial governments to guarantee that it's the elected officials rather than the courts who have the last word. That was Pierre Elliott Trudeau who said that, Mr. Speaker. And the same man was talking about the importance of a notwithstanding clause in a healthy democracy. But this government is doing the opposite. They want to give the courts the final word, the last word. Will they back off? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was right. The legislatures are supposed to have the last word, but when it's used preventatively, it's actually being used as the first word, not the last word. These things are supposed to be tested by the courts, and we expressed our concerns, and we will continue to do so. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. As we know, the Liberals want to challenge Bill 21 on secularism and Bill 96 on French. Their desire to attack the notwithstanding clause is just a continuation of that fight. They want to ensure Quebec can never again introduce laws like 21 and 96, that Quebec can never again defend its own collective rights, and that Quebec can never again have its own distinct values. Is that what this is really all about? That Quebecers are different and they can't accept that? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague has a lot of experience in Parliament. He knows that the Government of Canada's position hasn't changed. We've always said we had reservations about the use of the notwithstanding clause in a preventative way. My honourable colleague talked about having the last word. It shouldn't be the first word, Mr. Speaker. It should be the last resort. We accept that. We understand that. We understand how the notwithstanding clause is supposed to be used, but we will never agree to its preventative use, and it shouldn't be my colleague's view either.
Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government, inflation is at a 40-year high as a result of this government's inflationary spending. But they have managed to spend over $100 million. Actually, we don't know how much, Mr. Speaker, because the Prime Minister will not tell us, on a single consulting firm, McKinsey & Company. So while Canadians have never had it so bad, Liberal insiders and consulting firms have never had it so good. So why doesn't the Prime Minister just admit that him and his good buddy, Dominic Barton, are running Canada and disappointing Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services.
Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite for the question. The procurement of professional services is used to complement the work of Canada's professional public service by meeting unexpected fluctuations in workload and to acquire special expertise. We are committed to ensuring that government contracts stand up to the highest standards. The Prime Minister has asked the President of the Treasury Board and I to conduct a review, to take a close look at the numbers and to look into the circumstances, and we are doing just that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians have never had it so bad, while Liberal insiders like Dominic Barton have never had it so good. Now, Dominic Barton was running a government advisory body, while at the same time his company was collecting over $100 million in contracts on the side. Barton and his cronies at McKinsey had privileged access to the Prime Minister and were using that access to make money. This government has done so much for Dominic Barton and McKinsey and so little for struggling Canadians. So once again, will the government answer how much money have they given in total to McKinsey?
The Honourable Minister.
I want to assure this House that Public Services and Procurement Canada takes its role as the central purchasing department very seriously. We ensure value for money and quality of services for Canadians. Minister Fortier's focus will rest on the policy, while I'm focusing on the circumstances of the contracts. I will be testifying alongside my officials at the Government Operations Committee to give more thorough and complete answers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I know we're back and we're all excited to be back, but I just want to remind the honourable members, when referring to someone else in the chamber, refer to them by their riding or by the position they hold and not their name. I know we've been away for a little bit and just want to remind everyone. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps I can assist the minister in getting to the bottom of the circumstances around these contracts. The Prime Minister is very close personal friends with Dominic Barton, who is the managing partner of McKinsey. Now, under Dominic Barton, McKinsey monitored dissident social media accounts for the Saudi government, had a corporate retreat down the road from a concentration camp in China, and advised the pharmaceutical company to reward pharmacists for causing overdose deaths. You are the company you keep, and the company that this Prime Minister keeps is called McKinsey. Once again, how much money did the Prime Minister funnel to his friends at McKinsey?
The Honourable Minister.
To assure the House yet again that procurement contracts must adhere to Treasury Board policies and directives which are intended to ensure that contracts are awarded in a fair, open and transparent manner. Given the volume of government procurement, controls are in place at various levels based on contract value, risk and complexity. Following recent concerns about contracts provided to McKinsey, we're undertaking a full review of all procurements with this company. Details are still being finalized, but the intent will be to verify if these procurements were conducted in accordance with Treasury Board policies and directives. Thank you, Mr.
The honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, 2 seasons of travel chaos left Canadians sleeping on airport floors, stranded in countries around the world, and out thousands of dollars. This government has over 33,000 air passenger complaints before it, and the folks who do manage to jump through all the Liberals' hoops are having to wait over a year and a half to have their complaints reviewed. Now, despite all of this, this government hasn't fined the airlines a single dollar for failing to compensate passengers. Why is it that Canada seems to have a minister for airlines, but no minister for air passengers?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for his question. Our government is committed to protecting passengers' rights. In fact, our government was the first government in Canada's history to pass a bill in this chamber to support passengers' rights. Of course, the last couple of years have been very difficult on the aviation sector because of the pandemic and because of the public health situation. We are working with the Canadian Transportation Agency to provide the resources that they need, and the chair of the Canadian Transportation Agency was at committee where the honourable member got the chance to ask his questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are dealing with the costs of the climate crisis. Well, everyday costs are soaring. People are having to cut back on their already tight budgets, while huge grocery chains and oil and gas companies make billions. A windfall tax would force these rich CEOs to finally pay what they owe. With this, the government could put money back into the pockets of Canadians and invest in clean energy. Will the Prime Minister implement a windfall profits tax to make Canada more affordable for people instead of more profitable for billionaires?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government is absolutely committed to ensuring that everyone pays their fair share in Canada. That is why our government implemented a 15% COVID recovery dividend levied on our largest banks and insurance companies. That is why our government has introduced a permanent 1.5% tax on the largest banks and insurance companies in Canada. That is why we are implementing a 2% tax on share buybacks. And that is why we have put in place a luxury tax on luxury planes, yachts, and cars. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Mississauga Lakeshore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor and a privilege to stand before this House for the first time. Earlier today, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development led off a debate on Bill C-35 to enshrine the Canada-wide early learning and child care system into law. My constituents all know also well how important access to affordable and inclusive health care is for our economy and women's empowerment. Could the Minister please update this House on how Bill C-35 will ensure affordable and accessible quality health care is here to stay? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Let me begin by congratulating and welcoming my newest colleague from Mississauga Lakeshore to this House. I'm thrilled to talk about Bill C-35 and the important work that it is going to do to ensure to Canadians, to families, to children, to women, to daycare providers that the federal government is there for the long term. And I have no doubt that his constituents in Mississauga Lakeshore voted him because they know that he is a hard worker, but that the Liberal government is going to be there in tough times. I'm glad for the support of the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. I hope the Conservatives will reverse their position.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
After 8 years, breaking ethics laws has become as synonymous with these Liberals as higher taxes. And now, for a record 5th time, a Liberal minister has been caught breaking ethics laws at a time when Canadians are struggling to afford to heat their homes and put food on the table for their families. The Trade Minister was finding the time and taxpayer money to line the pockets of her insider friend. Another day, another lawless Liberal under this lawless Prime Minister. So will the Minister do the right thing and cut a check to make restitution for her corruption?
The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner has reviewed this issue and has reached his consensus or his conclusion. And to this House, I apologized. I regret that I made a mistake. I should have recused myself. At the time, it was quite urgent that we communicated with Canadians, particularly small businesses, about those urgent supports that were needed. But I do regret that I did not recuse myself, and for that I apologize to this House. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, it's unfortunate but not surprising that the Minister won't make it right after serving under this Prime Minister who has twice himself been found guilty of breaking Canada's ethics laws. These Liberals exist solely for the purpose to hold on to power. They divide Canadians, pit neighbour against neighbour, and line the pockets of Liberal insiders while they're at it. So, will the Prime Minister today ask for this Minister's resignation?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
No.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
After 8 years, yet again, another Liberal patronage scandal. Not content with gifting lucrative government contracts to hateful anti-Semites, now the Minister of Diversity, member for York Simcoe, handed $93,000 to a staffer's sister for public relations advice. Mr. Speaker, it's not difficult to realize that handling over taxpayers' dollars to your staff's family is a bad idea. Yet here we are again. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister do the only responsible and dignified action and pay back the money?
The Honourable Minister.
One of the most important duties of any Member of Parliament is to communicate with their riders. That's why Members of Parliament are permitted to use their operating budgets to hire service providers to help them communicate with their constituents. In this case, a small business in Toronto was hired by my constituency office to offer assistance in providing communication services to my constituents. Let me be clear, the rules were followed, the contract with this organization was publicly disclosed, and the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner has advised that there is no conflict of interest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Montmagny.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, d'Islay, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, even after spending $54 million on the ArriveCAN application, the Official Languages Commissioner has criticized the government in this file. When traveling to the U.S., a citizen was not able to obtain the application in its French version. even though French is one of our 2 official languages, Mr. Speaker. The government spent a fortune on a service that ended up violating Francophones' rights. This government has been in power for 8 years. Will it finally admit that it's simply incompetent? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my colleague that it's essential that when we launch a service that it be available in both official languages, and that's exactly what we did with ArriveCAN. When the public raised some concerns, then all efforts were made to increase the level of service. We will continue to invest to offer the service in both official languages. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, after years of insistence from Quebec, the provinces, and the Bloc Québécois, there will finally be a meeting of the premiers and the prime minister on health transfers on February 7th. But the federal government is lowering expectations and is calling it a working meeting to discuss the needs. But we know what they are, that Ottawa cover 35% of health costs. For 28 months, all of the premiers have been repeating that, and they did that again this morning in a press release. So the federal government knows what the needs are. Will it bring its checkbook to the meeting on February 7th? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are very pleased to answer this question because we're all looking forward to further developments on this, including February 7th, when the First Ministers' meeting will occur and when we can discuss the various efforts made over the last few months by the federal government and in the last years, where the government spent billions of dollars to save lives and strengthen our system and to ensure that we have the health system that we need in Canada. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, during this time, the situation has only gotten worse in our hospitals. In fact, the situation is so bad that exhausted nurses in Maisonneuve-Rosemont refused to come to work 2 weeks ago, and are threatening to leave their jobs. We no longer need working meetings. We need results. Quebec and the provinces have clearly stated their needs, and they've been doing that for 28 months. They repeated it again this morning. So on February 7th, will Ottawa at least put some money on the table to prove that it's negotiating in good faith? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, putting money on the table is what we've been doing for years. With a $72 billion additional investment in the Canada health transfers, and by covering 80% of expenses related to COVID-19, we've also increased the Canada health transfers and will be doing so by 10% further in March, with an additional investment to do something about the problems in our ERs. A lot of money and a lot of results to help patients and workers. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Heritage and the Prime Minister's Quebec Lieutenant responded strongly to what was said by the federal representative to combat Islamophobia, who made remarks about Quebecers that were extremely inappropriate. He said that as a Quebecer, he was deeply wounded and insulted by her remarks. If that's the case, is he actually going to take action? Will he do something and put pressure on the government to cancel this senseless political appointment? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our position is clear. We know that Quebecers are against all forms of racism and hate. The federal representative has already clarified her statements, and I would refer the member to her statements on that topic.
St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, last month, OPP Constable Greg Priscilla was murdered by a violent criminal out on bail. Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkew said this murder was senseless and preventable, and that Canada needs bail reform. Unfortunately, access to bail for violent criminals was made easier by the Liberal government's Bill C-75. Countless Canadians have been harmed by the Liberal bail system. It must be reformed. Will the Liberal government make that commitment today?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Canadians deserve to be and feel safe. and we all have a role in protecting our communities. The laws on bail are clear, Mr. Speaker. Detaining an accused person is justified if it is necessary to protect the safety of the public. As my colleague knows, provinces and territories, and of course police forces, are responsible for the enforcement of bail conditions. We all have a role to play, and we at the federal level are providing resources to support them. We'll continue to do so in order to ensure that laws are applied appropriately. Mr. Speaker, we remain open to good ideas and proposals from the opposition, from provinces and territories, to reforming our criminal justice system, including the bail system.
Well, member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have had 8 years to make our streets safer, and they've only made it worse. The facts are, last year in Toronto, of the 44 homicides by shooting, 24 of the criminals responsible were out on bail when they committed the murders. All 13 premiers of Canada signed a historic letter to this Prime Minister demanding bail reform. The Toronto Police are demanding bail reform. So what's it going to take for the Liberal government to reform the broken Liberal bail system, Mr. Speaker? What's it going to take?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the bail reform that we undertook in Bill C-75 in a number of important cases made it harder to get bail. Mr. Speaker, as I have said, we are open to any good proposal from the opposition, from provinces and territories. Mr. Speaker, at a federal, provincial, territorial justice ministers conference in the fall, I committed to that long before this issue became a hot issue at this House of Commons. So we are working with the provinces and territories, Mr. Speaker, to look at legitimate suggestions for bail reform.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the rapid decline of biodiversity is threatening the very basis of our economy, our food security, our health, and our quality of life. It represents serious and irreversible risks for our community. Can the Minister of Environment and Climate Change tell this House about the agreement on a historic global agreement that was signed after 13 days of negotiation at COP15 in Montreal? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his important question and for his activism on this important issue. In December, countries from throughout the globe came together in Montreal to fight biodiversity loss. Millions of species are threatened globally and 640 in Canada. Representatives from more than 160 countries put their differences aside, and we committed to protecting 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030. This is a historic agreement, and Canadians should be proud of it, because we were a central part of it. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, with Bill C-21 on firearms, people won't be able to go hunting at the same time as criminals continue sowing terror in our streets. Meanwhile, provincial premiers are unanimously asking for this Liberal government to take measures to strengthen our bail system. In December, a police officer was killed by a criminal out on bail who represented a real danger to society. So when will this Prime Minister stop playing political games with Canadian safety? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying earlier, there are clear laws on bail. We all have a role to play. The provinces and territories and police services need to implement the laws implemented at the laws created at the federal government, rather. In November, at a ministers' meetings, I agreed with my colleague for public safety to work with the provinces to strengthen the bail system. We are doing that work, Mr. Speaker. We are open to suggestions in order to reform the system.
Member for Thornhill.
Your commuters in Toronto have been set on fire, stabbed, and swarmed in a growing wave of violence, and our transit operators are scared to go to work. In the first 3 weeks of this year, Toronto police said that the crimes were up more than 37%. Wow. We have repeat violent offenders out on our streets because of this government's weak bail system, and the Minister of Public Safety says he's concerned, but not concerned enough to do anything about it. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are a little more than just concerned. When are we going to see the bail reform that every premier, police unions, and police chiefs have called for in this country?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I am deeply concerned with the recent spike of violence of the TTC, and I've spoken directly with Mayor Tory to express our unwavering support to him and the city. Our government, in fact, has doubled down on support for law enforcement, on violence prevention, on mental health supports, on supports for homelessness and for poverty, Mr. Speaker. Most recently, I announced $12 million in funding, along with the Mayor, to address many of the social determinants that can lead to violence through the Building Safer Communities Fund, a fund that the Conservatives voted against, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with the City of Toronto and all communities to keep our public transit safe.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, violent crime is up 32%. That's the record. The record is the weak bail system, and it keeps serious, violent criminals out of jail and on our streets. There is a former Toronto police chief sitting on that side of the House who has made more comments about the crime in the U.S. than his own city this week. Enough with the thoughts and the prayers and the concern. People don't feel safe in their communities, and they fear riding public transit. So what is it going to take to get the minister to pay attention on the random attacks happening on public transit and reform the bail system?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I assure my colleague and all members in this House that this government is paying attention to the situation in Toronto, which is why, without any hesitation or haste, I contacted the Mayor to make sure that he knew that this government would be there to support the City of Toronto, as we have done in the past with regards to law enforcement, as we have done in the past with regards to preventing crime through the $12 million announcement that we made last spring with the Mayor, as we have done in the past with regards to our investments in Canada's summer jobs, Mr. Speaker, to support those young people who were at most risk, Mr. Speaker. That is the record of this government, and we will continue to build on it to protect all residents and all communities to keep them safe. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, every Canadian deserves a safe and affordable place to call home. By continuing to make substantial investments in affordable housing, we're creating new jobs, building an inclusive economy, and strengthening our economies. We also know many employers need access to a pool of workers, such as labour shortages are felt across Canada. Could the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship tell us how working migrant workers can be a part of the solution to address Canada's critical housing needs?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, there are many thousands of people in this country who currently don't have immigration status but have been making contributions to our communities for many years, many of whom who have families living in these communities. I'm thrilled to share with this House that we've worked very closely with the organized labor movement in this country to launch the out-of-status construction workers pilot to bring those people out of the shadows, to allow them to make a contribution and to help build more homes for our communities. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Davenport for attending on my behalf to make an important announcement that we will be doubling the scale of this program so we can bring more people into the light, build more homes for Canadians, and serve everyone's interests at the same time.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the suspected for-profit buyer of Lions Place, a 287-unit non-profit seniors housing building in Winnipeg Centre, is a company with a history of hiking rents. Recently, the province announced rental support for current tenants, but this is a Band-Aid solution that protects residents only for 2 years while subsidizing rent increases. The Minister of Northern Affairs said he wants to see Lions Place, in quotes, remain in non-profit hands. So what is he and the Liberal government going to do to ensure that this affordable seniors housing stays in non-profit hands?
The Honourable Minister for Northern Affairs.
I thank the member for that very important question. I and our government have made it very clear we are here to build more non-profit affordable housing. I've stated on the record I feel Lions Club should provide non-profit affordable housing for generations in downtown Winnipeg. I've written to the chair of the board of directors asking for a meeting. I have not had a response to my letter, Mr. Speaker, but we are here. I am here to work with Lions Club, to work with the province of Manitoba, to make sure that it remains affordable housing.
The Honourable Member for Spadina Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, in August 2021, the government invested $20 million for urgent work at Toronto's Harbourfront Centre. The rationale was that improving cultural and community infrastructure builds strong, prosperous, and dynamic communities. Mr. Speaker, those objectives have fallen short of reality. Harbourfront Centre has ignored input from residents and local organizations. The Centre claims that Canadian Heritage was informed of and approved the new plans that included the elimination of a beloved and popular permanent skating rink. Your Key Neighborhood Association and Waterfront for All were denied a meeting to discuss the rink's closure and the area's way forward. Is the minister okay with giving away $20 million with little public consultation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think my honourable colleague understands the importance our government places on the appropriate investments in the Toronto waterfront. We have a history of collaborating both with the province of Ontario and the City of Toronto. I'm happy to tell my colleague that I had a chance in December to meet with senior executives and board members of Toronto Waterfront. I've had conversations both with Mayor Tory and the Provincial Infrastructure Minister in Ontario. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to support the good work done by Toronto Waterfront.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for question period today. C'est le temps qu'on a. That's all the time we have. For Edmonton Strathcona is rising on a point of order.
Speaker, I believe that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion. That given reports of human rights abuses and attacks on civilians in Ukraine and other parts of the world by the Russian-supported Wagner Group, the House call upon the